Abraham Lincoln's childhood and early life. In November 1860, just before the Civil War began, Abraham Lincoln, a self-taught lawyer, lawmaker, and outspoken opponent of slavery, was chosen to serve as the 16th President of the United States. Lincoln demonstrated his abilities as a cunning military tactician and as a cunning leader. His Gettysburg Address is one of the most well-known speeches in American history, and his Emancipation Proclamation helped end slavery. John Wilkes Booth, a supporter of the Confederacy, killed Abraham Lincoln in April 1865, just as the Union was about to win the war. Lincoln is recognized as one of the greatest presidents in American history because of his assassination, which turned him into a martyr for the cause of liberty. Abraham Lincoln's youth and formative years. In a one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, on February 12, 1809, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln welcomed a son named Abraham Lincoln. In 1816, his family relocated to southern Indiana. Lincoln only attended 3 short sessions of local schools for his formal education because he had to labor nonstop to support his family. When his family relocated to Macon County in southern Illinois in 1830, Lincoln was hired as a river flatboat driver to transport cargo from there to New Orleans. Lincoln became interested in local politics as a supporter of the Whig Party after relocating to the Illinois town of New Salem, where he worked as a shopkeeper and a postmaster. In 1834, he was elected to the Illinois State Assembly. Lincoln opposed the expansion of slavery into the territories, just like his Whig idols Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, and he had a lofty vision for the growing United States that put an emphasis on trade in cities rather than farm. Did you realize? Abraham Lincoln and his family experienced hardship during the war years. The emotionally frail Mary Lincoln, who was well known for her frivolity and spendthrift habits, staged seances in the White House in the hopes of speaking with him when his infant son Willie died of typhoid disease in 1862, earning her even more contempt. Lincoln studied law on his own, passing the bar exam in 1836. He relocated to Springfield, the newly designated state capital, the following year. He worked there as a lawyer for the following few years, representing clients that included everyone from locals in tiny villages to large railroad companies. In 1842, he married Mary Todd, a wealthy Kentucky belle who had attracted several suitors, including Stephen Douglas, Lincoln's future political rival. The couple had 4 children in total: Robert Todd (1843–1926), Edward Baker (1846–1850), William Wallace (1850–1862), and Thomas Tad Lincoln (1853–1871), but only one of them survived to adulthood. Lincoln makes his political debut. In 1846, Lincoln was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives and he took office the next year. Many Illinois citizens disliked Lincoln as a legislator because of his outspoken opposition to the Mexican-American War. In 1849, after promising not to run for re-election, he moved back to Springfield. The Kansas-Nebraska Act 1854, which stated that the voters of each territory, rather than the federal government, had the right to decide whether the territory should be a slave or free state, was pushed through Congress by Douglas, a prominent Democrat. This event propelled Douglas back into national politics. Lincoln addressed a sizable gathering on October 16, 1854, in Peoria to discuss the benefits of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Together with Douglas, they criticized slavery and its growth, calling the practice a violation of the Declaration of Independence's core principles. With the Whig Party in ruins, Lincoln joined the newly created Republican Party in 1856 and ran for the Senate again that year. He had also unsuccessfully sought the job in 1855. The Republican Party was founded primarily to oppose the expansion of slavery into the territories. Lincoln's now famous House Divided address was delivered in June, and in it, he cited passages from the Gospels to support his contention that this government cannot endure permanently, half slave and half free. After that, Lincoln and Douglas engaged in a series of well-known debates. Even though Lincoln lost the race for the Senate, his performance helped establish his name on a national scale. The 1860 presidential campaign of Abraham Lincoln. In the early months of 1860, after giving another stirring address at Cooper Union in New York City, Lincoln's standing increased even further. Republicans chose Abraham Lincoln as their presidential candidate that May, bypassing Senator William H. Seward of New York and other strong prospects in favor of the rangy Illinois lawyer with just one unremarkable term in Congress. Lincoln faced Douglas, who represented the Northern Democrats, again in the general election. The Southern Democrats had chosen John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, and John Bell was a candidate for the newly formed Constitutional Union Party. Lincoln secured the majority of the North in the Electoral College to win the White House because Breckinridge and Bell split the vote in the South. Many of his political adversaries, including Seward, Salmon P. Chase, Edward Bates, and Edwin M. Stanton, made up his extraordinarily potent cabinet. Lincoln's role in the Civil War. The election of an anti-slavery Northerner as the 16th President of the United States pushed many Southerners over the edge after years of intersectional hostilities. 7 Southern states had already broken away from the Union by the time Lincoln took office as the 16th President of the United States in March 1861, creating the Confederate States of America. In April, Lincoln gave the order for a squadron of Union ships to supply the American fort at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Civil War got underway when the Confederates opened fire on the fort and the Union fleet. After the Union's hopes for a speedy triumph at Bull Run, Manassas, were crushed, Lincoln requested 500,000 more soldiers as both sides braced for a protracted battle. While Jefferson Davis, the Confederate commander, was a West Point alumnus, a hero of the Mexican War, and a former Secretary of War, Abraham Lincoln only had a brief and unremarkable stint of service in the Black Hawk War 1832 to his credit. He shocked many when he demonstrated his leadership skills in battle, picking the best commanders and picking strategies and tactics rapidly in the early years of the Civil War. Lincoln was frequently irritated by General George McClellan's refusal to move forward, despite the fact that his troops loved him. When McClellan failed to pursue. Following the Union victory at Antietam in September 1862, Robert E. Lee was relieved of command by Lincoln as his Confederate army began to flee. Lincoln faced criticism during the conflict for suspending some civil rights, such as the habeas corpus right, but he believed that such actions were necessary to win the conflict. Abolition Proclamation and the Gettysburg Address. The Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which went into effect on January 1, 1863, and freed all enslaved people in the rebellious states not under federal control, but kept those in the border states loyal to the Union in servitude, was issued by Lincoln shortly after the Battle of Antietam, Sharpsburg. Lincoln once argued that his paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery, but he eventually came to see emancipation as one of his greatest accomplishments and would fight for the passage of a constitutional amendment outlawing slavery, which eventually passed as the 13th Amendment after his death in 1865. The Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania and Vicksburg, Mississippi, 2 significant Union wins in July 1863, finally changed the course of the war. Lincoln chose Ulysses S. Grant, the victor at Vicksburg, as the supreme commander of the Union troops in early 1864 after General George Meade failed to strike a decisive blow against Lee's army at Gettysburg. Lincoln, in November 1863. At the Gettysburg National Smithereens dedication ceremony, Abraham Lincoln spoke for just 272 words. The Gettysburg Address, which was extensively disseminated, beautifully articulated the reason for the war by evoking the Founding Fathers, the Declaration of Independence, and the quest of equality for all people. One of the most frequently referenced addresses in history, it became the most well-known speech of Lincoln's presidency. Presidential election of 1864 is won by Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln had a difficult re-election campaign in 1864 against Democratic contender and former Union General George McClellan, but Union military victories, particularly General William T. Sherman's conquest of Atlanta in September, helped Lincoln win a majority of votes. Lincoln spoke about the necessity of Reconstruction in his second inaugural address, which he gave on March 4, 1865. Lincoln emphasized the need to restore the Union in the South by saying, "with malice towards none, with charity for all." On April 9, Lee submitted to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, as Sherman triumphantly advanced through the Carolinas after beginning his march to the sea from Atlanta. Lincoln urged his audience to welcome the Southern states back into the Union in a speech he delivered on the White House lawn on April 11 as the Union victory drew close. Tragically, Lincoln would not live to see his plan for Reconstruction implemented. An assassination of Abraham Lincoln. At Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., on the evening of April 14, 1865, actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth snuck into the president's box and shot him in the back of the head. Although he was taken to a boarding house opposite from the theater, Lincoln never recovered consciousness and passed away early on April 15, 1865. Lincoln became a national martyr as a result of his murder. His casket departed Washington, D.C. on April 21 in order to travel by train to Springfield, Illinois, where he would be laid to rest on May 4. The funeral train for Abraham Lincoln passed through 180 cities and 7 states so that mourners may pay respects to the deceased leader. 407 years ago, our fathers founded a new country on this continent, committed to the idea that all people are created equal and free. This nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.